There is a particular kind of silence that does not feel empty. It feels haunted. It is the silence after someone once held your face like it mattered. After the late-night confessions. After the tenderness. After the strange intimacy that felt almost sacred because it was so hard to reach. And then one day, without a clean ending, without words big enough to explain the collapse, they pulled away. Their replies slowed, their warmth cooled. Their eyes stopped resting on you for too long. And what was left behind was not just heartbreak, it was confusion. The kind that keeps the body awake at 2 a.m., replaying old conversations like they contain a hidden code. You asked yourself the same question in 100 different ways. If it was real, how could they disappear? If they cared, how could they become so distant? And if they didn't care, why did it feel so deep when it was happening? This is the part no one tells you. Sometimes the person who disappears is not the one who feels the least. Sometimes they are the one who feels too much, too quickly, with too little internal safety to hold it. And that truth is brutal. Because it means your pain was not always caused by your lack of worth. It was caused by their inability to stay present inside intimacy without feeling like they were losing themselves. But there is another brutal truth, and this one is for you. If you kept chasing clarity from someone who was already withdrawing, you did not create closeness. You created pressure. Not because your needs were wrong, not because your love was too much, but because every time you moved toward them in panic, they experienced it through a nervous system trained to treat emotional intensity like danger. And once that switch flips inside an avoidant person, they do not sit there calmly evaluating your good intentions. Their body decides before their mind does. The amygdala sounds the alarm, cortisol rises, the nervous system goes from connection to self-protection. And suddenly, your love, your questions, your longing, your tears, your need for reassurance, all get translated into one word inside them. Threat. Not because you were a threat, because closeness was. That is why some avoidants can leave with a face so calm it almost feels cruel. It is not always indifference. Sometimes it is anesthesia. Emotional overload does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like coldness. Sometimes it looks like certainty. Sometimes it looks like someone saying, "I just need space," when what they really mean is, "Something in me is shutting down, and I don't know how to stop it." And here is the part that changes everything if you really let it sink in. They did not always stop caring. They got overwhelmed. There is a difference, a massive one, because when someone truly stops caring, they usually detach in one direction and keep going. But when someone is avoidant and overwhelmed, they leave physically while remaining emotionally unfinished. They create distance on the outside, but internally, the bond is not always resolved. It lingers. It lives in fragments, in resisted memories, in sensations they cannot quite explain, in random moments when your name crosses their mind, and they instantly push it away, because even remembering you wakes up something they worked hard to bury. This is why some avoidants return years later, not because time made them romantic, not because they suddenly became wiser overnight, and not always because they consciously planned to come back. They return because what was suppressed is rarely erased. People think avoidant attachment is about not feeling. It isn't. It is often about feeling in a way that becomes too disorganizing to tolerate. It is a relationship with emotion built on control. Distance regulates them. Detachment regulates them. Independence regulates them. They tell themselves they are fine. They are better alone. They don't need much. They just want peace. But what they are often calling peace is the absence of activation, the absence of being stirred, the absence of vulnerability, and that can feel like relief for a while. At first, leaving works. It gives them dopamine in a strange way. Freedom, air, the return of control. No one asking where they are emotionally. No one needing them to name what they feel. No one pulling them deeper into a place where they can no longer hide from themselves. So they feel lighter. They feel sure. They may even look happier, more social, more focused, more alive. And that image can destroy you if you are the one left behind. Because you think, see, I meant nothing. They're thriving. But you are reading the first chapter and calling it the whole story. Avoidant people often feel relief before they feel loss. That sequence matters, because in the beginning, the nervous system celebrates the reduction of pressure. The body thinks it escaped. But after enough time passes, after the stimuli fade, after the noise quiets, after the distractions lose their power, something else starts happening. The emotional reality they outran begins to leak back in. Slowly, not all at once. A song, a season, a street, a phrase you used to say. The way no one else looked at them with that exact mixture of softness and recognition. The way you understood their silences better than most people understood words. The way they felt seen by you. And how terrifying that was. And now, you are no longer there. Now there is no text waiting, no emotional bridge, no person leaning in, no one asking for more. Just silence. And silence is the core concept most people misunderstand. When you are dealing with an avoidant person, silence is not always absence. Sometimes, silence is confrontation. Sometimes, silence is the first thing strong enough to make them hear themselves. When you kept reaching, they could keep reacting to you. They could blame timing, pressure, expectations, the intensity of the relationship, their need for space. But when you finally stop, when you truly stop, not performatively, not to manipulate, but because something in you decides you will no longer beg for presence from the emotionally unavailable, the whole dynamic changes. Now there is nothing external for them to push against, and without that friction, they meet the emptiness they thought they wanted. This is where the power starts to move. Not because you played a game, because you ended one. Imagine them months later, maybe years, sitting in a car after work, scrolling with that flat, numb kind of boredom that never gets named, talking to people who are easy but not meaningful, dating in ways that never quite touch the center, being admired, desired, entertained, even chosen, but not deeply felt. And then, for one unguarded second, they remember you. Not just your face, your emotional presence, the way your energy reached places in them that most people never touched. The way being loved by you felt dangerously intimate. The way you seemed to want the real thing, not the performance. And suddenly, what once felt like suffocation starts to look different in memory. Now it looks like depth. Now it looks rare. Now it looks like the connection they have not been able to replace. This is when the avoidant mind starts rewriting what happened. Not into fantasy, but into delayed comprehension. They start asking quiet questions they never asked before. Was I too harsh? Did I leave something real because I got scared? Why did I feel safer alone than loved by someone who actually saw me? why do I still think about them? Why did no one after them make me feel that same intensity? Why does every shallow connection make me miss the one I ran from? And if enough time has passed, if enough life has disappointed them, if enough false independence has turned into loneliness, they may come back. Sometimes with a casual message, sometimes with nostalgia disguised as friendliness, sometimes with sudden vulnerability that shocks you, sometimes with, "I don't know why, but I've been thinking about you." Sometimes with apologies they were emotionally incapable of making before. Sometimes not with words at all, but with watching, circling, checking, lingering. Because what they could not process in real time is now returning in retrospect. That is the irony of avoidant attachment. They often understand the value of the bond most clearly only after the bond is gone and the emotional threat has cooled. Distance gives them access to feelings that closeness once shut down. But listen carefully, because this part matters more than the fantasy of them returning. Someone missing you is not the same as someone being ready for you. Someone regretting the loss is not the same as someone having healed the pattern that created the loss. And this is where so many people abandon themselves for a second time. Because when the avoidant returns, especially years later, it can feel like the universe finally correcting itself. It can feel validating, addictive, poetic. The message you waited for, the confession you prayed for, the proof that you were not crazy, not forgettable, not easy to replace. And yes, there is something deeply human in wanting that moment. But if you have done no inner work, if your self-worth is still starving, if part of you is still hoping they will return and finally choose you in the way they couldn't before, then their return can reactivate the exact wound you should be outgrowing. Because now the power dynamic flips in a dangerous way. The same person who once ran from your depth may now be pulled toward it. The same person who once went cold may now feel the ache. The same person who once left you spiraling may now be the one checking your pages, rereading old messages, wondering if you still think of them, wondering if they lost the best thing they ever had. But if you confuse their longing with your destiny, you will walk straight back into the old maze. You have to understand what is happening psychologically. When you finally detach, when you become emotionally non-reactive, when your energy is no longer available on demand, you stop feeding the anxious avoidant loop. There is no more chasing, no more over-explaining, no more proving, no more trying to be safe enough for someone committed to misreading intimacy as danger. And that absence changes the chemistry of the connection. Your silence removes the pressure that triggered their defense. Your absence creates space for memory to become emotionally accessible. Your non-reactivity interrupts the pattern that let them feel in control. And what was once easy for them to dismiss becomes difficult to forget. This is why they start missing you harder when you finally stop trying. Not because silence is a trick, because it reveals truth. It reveals whether the bond was real. It reveals whether they can feel without running. It reveals whether your presence mattered beyond convenience. And most of all, it reveals whether you can survive without their validation. That last one is everything. Because the deepest transformation is not, how do I make the avoidant come back? The deepest transformation is, who do I become when I no longer organize my worth around whether they do? That version of you is magnetic in a way that has nothing to do with tactics. It is the version that no longer bleeds in public for private crumbs. the version that lets people leave without collapsing into self-erasure, the version that understands that being loved inconsistently can create addiction, but not intimacy, the version that no longer mistakes emotional unavailability for mystery, the version that can look at someone returning after years and ask calmly, "What exactly are you offering now that you could not offer then?" That question terrifies people who are used to your softness being endlessly available. Because now your love is no longer easy access. Now it has standards. Now it has discernment. Now it has memory. And if they do return, you will see them differently. You will notice whether their words carry real accountability or just loneliness. You will notice whether they can stay present when emotion rises. You will notice whether they can tolerate your needs without shutting down. You will notice whether they are truly open or merely nostalgic. You will notice whether they want connection or just relief from the discomfort of losing you. That is the warning. Do not let delayed desire seduce you into forgetting old reality. Because avoidants often come back when the emotional climate feels safer for them, not necessarily when they have become safe for you. Read that again in your bones. Just because they miss you now does not mean they could hold you then. Just because they understand your value now does not mean they have built the capacity to protect it. Just because they return does not mean you are meant to reopen the door. Sometimes their return is closure for you, not reunion. Sometimes it is life showing you how far you have come. Sometimes it is the final test of whether you still betray yourself when love comes wearing familiar eyes. And maybe that is the real power shift no one talks about. Not that they come back, not that they obsess, not that they finally realize what they lost, but that one day, if they do return, they no longer meet the version of you who was waiting in emotional ruins. They meet someone whole, someone slower, someone clearer, someone who does not confuse chemistry with safety, someone who knows that being deeply felt by another person is beautiful, but being deeply anchored in yourself is freedom. Someone who can feel the old ache without becoming loyal to it. Someone who can hear, "I miss you," and still ask whether presence, consistency, and emotional courage are in the room too. Because this was never just a story about why some avoidants return years later. It was a story about what your silence teaches, what your withdrawal reveals, what your healing costs, and what your self-respect restores. Yes, some of them return years later because feelings delayed are still feelings, because suppression has a shelf life, because the body keeps score of bonds the mind tries to minimize. Because losing someone who truly touched them can echo for years in a person who only knows how to understand love once it is no longer asking anything of them. But your job is not to be the altar they finally crawl back to once they are lonely enough to feel. Your job is to become someone who is no longer hypnotized by being remembered. Let them remember. Let them wonder. Let them replay your voice in the quiet moments they can no longer outrun. Let them sit with the weight of what they could not hold. But you do not wait in the dark, proving your worth to someone who needed your absence to recognize your value. You rise. You become harder to manipulate because you are easier to love by yourself. You become calmer because you stop negotiating with inconsistency. You become more powerful because your nervous system no longer calls chaos passion. You become more attractive because your energy is no longer leaking through old wounds. You become the one who chooses, not the one who begs to be chosen. And that is when everything changes. Because the moment you stop asking, "Why did they leave?" and start asking, "Why was I taught to chase people who leave?" you begin to reclaim your life. The moment you stop romanticizing their return and start honoring your evolution, you break the cycle. The moment you realize that your silence was not emptiness, but self-respect finally finding a voice, you stop being haunted by their absence. You become the one who left the old pattern behind. You become the one who did not need years to understand the truth. You become the one who no longer confuses being wanted later with being valued now. And from that place, whether they return or not becomes small. Because your worth is no longer waiting for someone else's delayed emotional maturity to confirm it. It is already here. Steady, unshaken, yours. And that, more than their return, is the ending that saves you.